Hey everyone, this is Dan, and welcome to Dominion 6 at a glance. Today we'll talk about Andramania, the Dog Republic. To summarize them quickly, they are a potentially hyper-aggressive nation with an amazing unit roster and decent mages that have consistent path access. I believe that they are singularly focused on recruiting and buffing their powerful units. And speaking of the unit roster, everything is awesome. Even their crossbowmen have very powerful stats in melee. It's crazy. They all tend to be well armored with plate cuirasses and legionary helmets across the board. And I personally have a preference for the senatorial guard wielding the halberd and their sacred unit, who, even if I didn't have a bless for, I would probably recruit just because they're sacred, have higher magic resistance, and their stats are pretty damn good for a comparable cost to their mundane infantry. They come in a lot of flavors, but for the most part, I think you want to lean into the two-handed units and only really use spearmen if you're forced to because your enemy has a lot of crossbowmen. And most of the nations that do use crossbowmen, I think still would lose to the spearmen just due to the attack density that it's going to have. And that's a recurring theme for the nation is the attack density due to just every single one of their units having this bite attack is insane and can even pose threats to ethereal units. I do want a little tidbit to talk about the Howlers. They have foreign recruit units and commanders in non-fort islands and mountains, so it is worth aiming for those during expansion because these Howler units are very powerful. They berserk, they have 3 attacks. If you're able to buff them, which is difficult due to undisciplined, they can be extremely stupid in combat. It's worth noting they do have a little bit of animal awe, so if you are fighting someone like Patala that uses animals, they can be exceptionally good. But as the game progresses, you may want to start phasing them out because they do have 8 magic resistance, and that is fairly low in the mid to late game. Moving on to the Andromanian commanders, they tend to be just as awesome as their troops do. Their mundane leaders have really high leadership and morale bonuses. The only thing is that they kind of left their shields at home, so be careful about late-age crossbowmen. They get the Callistry Magistrate, which is going to provide Defense Organizer 2, raising your province defense up to 19 every turn, and reduces Unrest by 1, which is a very rare trait, and it's kind of niche, especially if you're blood hunting, because it happens after blood hunting has increased your Unrest, but before you've taxed your provinces, so that's pretty cool. Their mages come in a few varieties. They have the inexpensive Apprentice Magus, who's just their job is just research. Their randoms are pretty good, but you won't fight too much with these if you can help it. The Callistry Magus is going to be your workhorse mage, and it can be fairly expensive for a non-sacred, but every single one of them is good. They all come with Nature 2, and their randoms can get them a Fire 2 Astral 2 or an Earth Astral mix, which is huge. And then their 10% randoms are both extremely useful. Blood is self-explanatory, I hope. But Death can cast Darkness through a Communion, and that can be a big deal for this nation. We'll talk about that later. Moving on to their capital, they come in 2 flavors, the Magistrate Magus and the Callistry Senator. I'm personally not a big fan of the Magistrate Magus, even if they are fast recruit capital sacreds, or capital mages, which is cool, but they don't do anything special that your other mages don't already do. Your Callistry Senator, however, does have better paths compared to your out-of-fort Maguses, and they are sacred, so they won't cost as much. They're also the only way you're going to get water natively on the nation. And if we just talked about all the units being super awesome, imagine how good they're going to be when they're quickened. It should come as no surprise that most of my recommended spells for the nation will be buffs, considering how much I've hyped up their unit roster. We have Barkskin and Bardy Ethereal to keep our units alive. We have Solar Eclipse to turn off the lights and impose penalties on the enemy that might not see in the dark like your units do. We have Cat-Eyed Warriors to help your dog see even better in the dark. You might not want to use this with Solar Eclipse, or you might not need to, but if you get that Death Random Magister and he casts Darkness, then you really want to do Cat-Eyed Warriors, and the combination of those 2 spells might straight up win you a lot of fights. With your Earth Random Magisters, you can do Temper Armor or Strength of Giants. You might need to Communion or cast Earth Power for this. Everyone else can cast Beast Fury, which increases your attack skill on your units. You have Rage of the Cornered Rats, which is going to cause them to berserk and increase the average morale of your squad. And you have Howl, which is going to summon infinite wolves on the battlefield. And the main purpose of this is to draw crossbow fire or evocation fire that might otherwise really hurt your troops. Now it's being shot at these harmless, nearly harmless wolves coming in from the edges of the battlefield. The last spell is Riches from Beneath, which is really hard to cast on this nation. But if you have a pretender or some special unit that can do so, I think the extra resources and gold from this spell synergizes very well with how much you're needing to just pump out units. Moving on to the pretender design of the nation, Andramania is actually one of the rare and very few nations that they don't need much out of the pretender. I really think that you're going to want order, production, and growth scales on the nation. But other than that, your pretender can do whatever you want it to do, which is really interesting. You can have it set as a Titan that's going to cast a global, a Titan that can maybe provide better scales or defeat armies on its own so that your army doesn't have to. Or you can even move into another category of utility. So here I have the Great Sitta, which I know a lot of people might see this as a weird guy, but it actually does a lot for a few nations. I've taken this guy as Patala and done fantastic with him. It can instantly move to any province in the world in the normal or the magic phase. So for Andromania, I've heard of people already telling me that they're having issues with Magic Duel. So moving a Great Sitta unexpectedly into an army is going to draw a lot of Magic Duel fire and kill would-be duelers. It can also come in and just cast big astral spells on its own, cast big air spells on your own. You don't have access to air, so having this guy come in and do Mist, Storm, Arrow Fend, and kind of cover your ranged weapon weakness is really good. In a few rare occasions, it can also come in and take out maybe an immobile pretender or a different Titan that have come in to stop your massive mundane unit army. These are the natural counters to your armies. And this, in some ways, helps you deal with that. Alternatively, you can just go with a Fountain of Blood or something similar that's going to give you some late game magical variety that you might not have otherwise. Moving on to the gameplay of Andromania, I think you want to mass units as much as possible and full gas straight to your nearest neighbor and take their capital. On your way there, or during your expansion, you should probably prioritize highlands and mountains so you can recruit howlers, which are very strong early on. Once you get to the mid-game, hopefully you've killed your neighbor and didn't piss off everyone else, and you probably want to get your howlers killed at this point too. At this stage, try to focus on building up some infrastructure and preparing for your next war. You don't want to be at peace too long, but you do want to have some infrastructure out so that you can just mass recruit units while other nations may be trying to transition into blood economies or gem economies or something. Making it to the late game, you want to focus on making your boosters, making auto communion gear, and having a lot of small but efficient armies. It wasn't in the recommended spell list, but I do recommend checking towards Strength of Gaia because you use a lot of mundane troops, and this is a spell that's going to cover a lot of surprise elemental damage you might not be expecting, and a lot of your mages can cast it. Other than that, I think you want to use or leverage whatever your pretender was designed to do to increase your magical diversity, maybe summon other large casters, powerful casters like Elemental Royalty, Fairy Queens, maybe even vampires if you went that route. And then just keep in mind that your nation starts out very strong and it does scale well, but it's possible that other nations might scale better. So do try to close the game out sooner rather than later. And that ends our glance at Andromania, the Dog Republic. I hope you guys liked it. Please let me know in the comments below what you liked, what you didn't like, what you agree with, what you disagree with, or any other crazy strategies you might have. There's so much you can do with the pretender design of this nation and so many different routes you can take because it's so, in my opinion, inherently strong in the unit roster. Anyways, go ahead, leave a like, leave a subscription. It lets me know that these are the kind of videos you guys want to see. And with that, I will see you guys next time.